All right, without further ado, delighted. I think we've got two of our panelists and probably just waiting on the third for our first panel of the day. First panel of the day, very topical for a lot of folks in the room. We're seeing it across every industry, is on closing the mid-career gap. And I'll have the panelists actually elaborate on what we mean when we say the mid-career gap, but effectively this panel will dive into strategies to really promote and advance diverse talent. And so delighted to introduce our panelists. If we could flip to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to start with Anna Maria, who hopefully by the time I'm finished will have sorted her camera issues. But Anna Maria joins us from Volkswagen Canada, where she serves as CHRO. Really, like all the panelists, really impressive background. So she is a member of the Canadian Management Board at Volkswagen, leading the development and execution of HR strategy in support really of the overall business plan and strategic direction of the company. Anna Maria, we know personally, is passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and leverages her role to promote a workplace where all employees have a sense of belonging. Prior to Volkswagen, Anna Maria held HR leadership roles in a number of sectors, which I think adds a really interesting perspective. So thinking about food services, financial services, hospitality, and has always been committed to giving back to the community through nonprofits, like a local women's shelter and chair of, where she is also chair of their HR committee. So welcome, Anna Maria. Our next panelist joins us from the other side of the North American border. So La Traviette joins us from Horizon Media, where she is, I think, a really interesting role, Chief Marketing and Equity Officer. And we've worked with Horizon for a few years now. Really interesting to see that they've combined those roles. And I'm sure La Traviette will share why that was done. Visionary executive, 25 years of experience working across global brands like Edelman, Deloitte, American Express, Unilever, Essence, Horizon Media, of course. Well known for her strategic acumen and commitment to purpose-driven brands. And, it's a bit of a challenger executive. And so in 2022, La Traviette became the first Chief Marketing and Equity Officer at Horizon, with a really interesting pioneering model on integrating diversity and inclusion into business growth. And she has won numerous awards, including from Ad Age, Forbes, Campaign US. Beyond that, in her very little spare time, serves on boards advocating for youth education, social justice, and economic inclusion. So welcome, La Traviette. Okay, and from the other side of the pond, welcome, Catherine. We have Catherine, who is the head of private credit at M&G Investments, where she has been for over 20 years, joining the business in 2001. Started in private markets, particularly in leverage finance, becoming co-head of leverage finance in 2017, and currently serves as head of private credit in the private markets business. She's got responsibility for a lot of important activities, thinking about fund management, trading, sourcing, and analysis, supporting a range of private credit funds. Prior to that, she worked at N.M. Rothschild and Sons, and in 2020, she's acted as the business sponsor responsible for M&G's culture program. And we know Catherine initially through her work with the Investor Leadership Network. We've had the chance to, dig deep on what M&G is up to and their commitment to diversity and inclusion. So thrilled to have a different, I think, geographic perspective and also a different sector. So welcome, everyone. Okay, I am going to kick off with a pretty open-ended question, and I think we can probably go back to the panelist view. Whoever would like to start, feel free. What is the mid-career gap? So when we talk about closing the, smoothing the pipeline, what does that mean?
Give it a start. So the way we think about it is that critical point in an individual's career where they might be on the brink of taking on additional responsibilities. So in our industry, maybe 10 to 15, around 10 years or so, 15 years from starting out. And in the case of asset management, that might be in practice something like you may have had named portfolio manager responsibility, but you may have a much larger fund, that you're responsible for, maybe deal lead responsibility, a significant suite of clients, or credit oversight, where frankly the pressure is higher, the workload is significant, there can be a lot of travel, and that can often coincide with a very active professional life, but then at a point in an individual's personal life when they're maybe starting a family, so perhaps taking time off to have children and reappraising life organization after a parental leave. So it's sort of a crunch point, I think, when there's important professional personal choices to make. And in asset management, it's at this point when the data tells us that a gap emerges. We may have sort of broad parity between, say, just men and women as one lens, through to that point in asset management. There's a significant shift at that point. So we recognise there's a change that comes from that sort of confluence of personal and professional circumstances. Is that
really well said? Thanks, Catherine. Maybe Anna Maria, or what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I agree. It really is that point in your career where you're making decisions, right? And you're deciding, do you want to move ahead and take on more, whether it's larger teams, larger responsibilities, more travel, etc., just as already mentioned. But also from a business perspective, from a when you're looking at entry level or individual contributor roles, typically there's an abundance of talent that is available. But when you're transitioning into a functional manager or perhaps a people leader, that's where you have to really start thinking about, do you have a pipeline? Do you have succession in place? And as an individual, are you ready to take those steps? Not just from a personal perspective, but do you have the skills? Do you have the aspirations? And do you have a roadmap that aligns into where you see yourself moving forward? And how does that align into the organizational goals? So there is that point in your career and that point within the organization where that evaluation is very important on both sides.
Thank you. Very helpful. And LaTraviette, what would you add to that?
I would just say, I think many of us know what it feels like to reach a point in our careers, right? Where we just feel stuck, where the opportunities to advance just aren't there, even though we've earned them. And despite having the skills, the experience, the qualifications that we know are necessary, this is what I consider to be the mid-career gap. It's that chasm in career advancement opportunities, right? That many mid-career professionals face, but particularly those in underrepresented groups in comparison to their peers, right? And so we know that is often characterized by fewer promotions and diminished development and career growth opportunities and underrepresentation that we see at the higher levels of organizations. And I think even if we just look at the numbers around all of this, right, they tell the full story. I think it was last year, McKinsey and Lean In did the report that found women, and especially women of color, are less likely to be promoted at every level, not just a few, every level within the organization. And so for every 100 men that are promoted to manager, it was 87 women, and women of color, it's 82. And the same report finding that women of color have this double bind, accounting for less than 5% of senior leadership roles, even though they represent 20% of the population in the US in particular. And so I think when we began to look at things like this, right, we know the bottlenecks that they create, particularly at the mid-career level, which does make it harder for women and other underrepresented groups to reach senior roles. And then I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, both SHRM and Deloitte did separate studies, and SHRM found that mid-career women were 3 times more likely to leave their jobs than their male counterparts, largely to some of what my fellow panelists have discussed, right? Due to lack of promotion opportunities, unwelcoming corporate cultures, and for women of color, that jumped to more than 40% considering leaving by the mid-career stage. And so I think while these challenges can apply across the board, when we really look at the data and the statistics that demonstrate this mid-career gap for underrepresented groups in particular, it's real, right? And it has tangible effects on career progression and earning potential and overall satisfaction and all of these things that we know then ultimately bind us or get us to what we see and we find now, which is this lack of representation at higher levels of companies across the board.
Yeah, I really like that you kind of started us with data, LaTreviette. So just so
I'm data geek.
yeah, I mean, we're in the right place. But pulling our benchmarking data, and we, as you know, we work across every industry in many different regions. Like this is a trend that is cross-cutting in almost every direction. And so if I think about, a graph, typically what we see is on the y-axis, you have, percent representation, and on the x-axis, you have time, basically advancement. And we see very commonly a sharp drop.
Mhm.
And so you've got, for example, 50% women at the entry level. I know, Catherine, we spoke about this previously in the finance industry, the asset management industry. And by the time you get to senior levels, you're looking at 10 to 20%. And that applies not just to gender. We see it across every demographic category that we measure. We see it across people with mental health conditions, people with disabilities, people of color, caregivers. And so, what I'd love to dive into is there's not one reason that reality is occurring. The conventional wisdom, just you thinking about women as an example, is that women leave because they want to have kids. And we all know it's much more nuanced. So maybe I'd love to, maybe Anna Maria, let's start with the automotive industry. And of course, his very, long-lived sector, lots of history behind it, but maybe talk to me about what you're seeing in the automotive space. Let's start maybe particularly with gender.
Yeah, so I would agree the automotive industry has been and continues to be a male-dominated industry. The good thing is that it's recognized, right? You know that there's something that needs to be changed. The first step is recognizing it. And so if I can speak about our local environment within the GTA, the global automakers of Canada, together with a variety of OEMs, we collectively come together on a monthly basis to talk about DEI related topics. And so this is so important, not just because it's recognized, but because we are coming together. We are talking about what's impacting us. We are talking about the changes that we'd like to see happen and coming up with ways that we can collectively influence. It's all about continuous improvement, right? You're not going to change it overnight, but every little bit makes a big difference. And if I think about gender parity and speak of Volkswagen Group Canada in particular, we've recognized this. And so we've taken quite a lot of steps to try to bridge that gap. Whether it's training, whether it's succession planning, whether it's looking at our policies, there's no one fix. You have to look at the collective whole. And to your point, are women not being promoted or not being considered because they want to have families? Well, that shouldn't negate them from that, right? So what are the policies that organizations have in place to accommodate that? What's the flexibility? How do we set things up so that you can have both? Why do you have to pick? And so from a training perspective, last year we introduced a training session called Step Into Your Moxie. This has gone over exceptionally well. This is not focused on tactical or technical. Women are generally taught to be proper, to be polite, to be nurturing. And it's okay to be all those things, but that doesn't mean you can't be bold. You can't have confidence. You can't speak up and fight for something that you think is right, or celebrate your own successes. Be an advocate for yourself or for another woman. And so we launched this training. It's gone over really, really well. And we've received excellent feedback from our aspiring leaders, our first-time leaders, and maybe even our leaders who just needed that kind of a session. So that is one of the things we're doing. We complement that with your, what I'll call typical training, whether it's instructor-led in person, whether it's webinars, whether it's micro sessions. This allows particularly women to have the flexibility to make sure they're keeping up with current trends and skills, hard skills that are needed to keep up with changing needs, and making sure they're acquiring the skills to take on that next step, but they can do it on their own time and they have the flexibility around their schedule, right? So that's just some examples of the kind of things that organizations can do to help their ladies, their women get ahead within the organization.
Thank you, Anna Maria. And I really like the kind of holistic approach here. Work with your industry peers to change the kind of norms and structures of the industry, the programs, the policies, and then also, make sure that we're providing the resources and the training and the education so that, folks are prepared. I'm going to maybe flip next to Catherine. I know, very different geographic context, different industry, but not so different of an approach. Maybe speak to me about asset management and how M&G is tackling the mid-career gap. And if you could share a little bit about why that mid-career gap exists in your industry, I think that would be really interesting too.
Yes, I mean, I think that's as you've just sort of pointed out so eloquently, it's not just one factor. There's all sorts of components that come into play here, and in asset management, and specifically in private markets, where I don't think I'm overstating it the data suggests that actually there are arguably more acute challenges. It strikes me there's a number of sort of factors for this. So some are cultural, as has been called out already. The nature of the roles that we do, particularly on the front line of asset management, if I can put it like that, where you're dealing with clients, you're building portfolios, you're dealing transactions. There's a deal culture, there's a transaction culture that by its nature can feel quite directive, quite macho at times. It's very relationship driven. A lot of the historic sort of building of those relationships happens over drinks or in a kind of quite a sort of what can feel like a boys' club. That can be the nature of the challenge. That can be enormously to individuals that are sort of looking at that, thinking, well, if that's what you need to be able to do to operate, I don't feel like I can fit in with that. So I don't think that's specific for a moment or exclusive to asset management, but it's a factor of front office roles, of investment roles. So I would say we have a more acute challenge in senior executive and in investment roles for that reason, culturally. So that's a factor that is industry wide. We can tackle it, attempt to tackle it sort of within the organisation, but I think that's where some of those cross industry networks are so important to sort of attempt to build a sort of a collective understanding and recognition about this. So it has to be internal and cross organisation as well. So there's cultural barriers. There's challenges around role models and mentoring. If you can't see someone who is dealing with the issues that you are dealing with or has the similar aspirations to you in a role that you might look at, you can't see anybody like you. I think that can be challenging as well, and that's where this can become sort of reinforcing, and we need to break that. We've done a lot of work in M&G on talent management and promotions, just to really hone in on that critical point in the way in which we can equip women, set expectations, and underrepresented groups, I should say, to be recognised, to be seen as talent, to be spotted for the skills that they can bring in a holistic context, and to sort of nurture that in a really sort of rounded way. And very happy, if of interest, to sort of talk about some of the things that we've done there. I think then also, as has been mentioned already, that point around flexible working arrangements and career interruptions is just another factor. So there's a number of factors that come together here, different issues to address, different techniques to employ. But in M&G, I would say this, and a lot of organisations, feels it's two-way. There's one thing about, exactly as you said, Anna Maria, the organisation itself as a group, as an entity, recognising the gap, looking at the data, questioning why there are disparities across the piece. But there's also an external lens in. So for us, that comes twofold, both from shareholders, but also from our institutional investors who are saying to us, not unhelpfully, what are you doing about this? We think diversity of thought leads to better investment outcomes. So we want to see the way in which you are bringing diversity of thought into your investment process. That's not unhelpful too. So there can be internal drivers and external drivers too, all of which provide that sort of acknowledgement of the issue, I suppose, and of the reason we're seeking to address it. It's because it's not only the right thing to do, but it's the right thing for our business in terms of delivering to our clients. So we've done a lot in that space, particularly on the talent and progression side, to improve.
Catherine, that is a perfect segue to La Traviette. Speaking of the business case for making diversity and inclusion core to your value proposition. One before I turn there, one thing that has honestly been a light bulb moment for me in the asset management space and the investment space is, I mean, look, we can work organization by organization individually and help change norms and, you know, culture and values, et cetera, policies, programs, but the nature of the work in a lot of the sectors we work in is kind of by necessity cross company. And so what was so interesting to me in asset management is we dug into the mid-career gap. It really was the deal flow culture that came up as like the biggest driver. And it's here, I think you mentioned this, in the UK, we see socioeconomic background as one of the biggest areas of exclusion. And a lot of that is because deals are exchanged and information is exchanged, you know, in those literal old boys clubs. And so how do we kind of change that? And that's in between companies. You know, I've got a deal that you might be interested in investing in, and that's proprietary and that's valuable. So maybe with that in mind, speaking of kind of competition, La Traviette, talk to me about the mid-career gap and talk to me, you know, so interested in how Horizon has positioned itself as, you know, I think breaking a lot of conventional wisdom on DEI in the media space.
Yeah, so we have done quite a bit. We've been quite focused on this, and I think first we've built programs in partnership with the business, right? And so we've ensured that anything that we build is rooted in data and accountability. I mentioned kind of I'm a data geek, right, Laura? It's kind of how we came to be with partners with Diversio, and that's so important. But we also are looking at what we are designing to impact both short and long-term goals, right? So if we're looking at underrepresented talent in particular entry levels where we know it's quite highly represented, and you can almost get excited when you think about a longer term pipeline to say, okay, our longer term pipeline is going to look great, right? But then it doesn't, because then we know they begin to disappear at kind of that mid-career mark. And so one of the measures that we found successful in helping Horizon kind of build both, I would say, investment and accountability and talent and cultural programs from the outset is ensuring that our members of the business, our leaders, are included in key design phases up front, right? And so I lead a function called marketing and equity. And how did we get here, right? So I had long held a hypothesis that in order to see different results, you have to do things differently. And I felt that way about diversity in particular because my orientation to it had always been from a business perspective and running a P&L around it and seeing where some of the not so innovative, you know, areas were that we could improve upon. If we look at every area of the business, we innovate. Right? It's how our businesses thrive. We are constantly innovating, but when we looked at this discipline of diversity and DEI, it was really one of the only parts of a business that we weren't asking and expecting to innovate. And so when I came on board, I'm a marketer, right? That's what I do. That's my function. But I also understand the import and the business value of DEI and how it, you know, we espouse all of the business benefits, and yet we delegate it to a talent and culture function. And so for us, it was about what does a partnership across the enterprise look like, and how do we then begin to work with our leaders to identify and set goals for which they then become accountable, right? And so if we're looking at different, you know, I'll give an example of just different programs that or initiatives that we've started over the last 24 months or so. All of our VP Plus leaders across our organization are now enrolled as mentors in our enterprise-wide program. So that ensures that we are able to match demand for mentorship with our emerging talent, and particularly those at a mid-career level. We named that program Horizon Thrive, right? So it's transforming how relationships inspire and value everyone. And we all know what the research says around mentorship, right? It's meaningful mentorship programs. We see increases in retention and engagement and productivity and innovation, but even beyond the research, we see mentorship as a tangible investment back into our people and an opportunity for us to develop a homegrown bench of emerging talent. And so we designed Thrive, which was our first enterprise-wide mentorship and networking program to bolster these career development opportunities. And we saw and are seeing the benefits of that almost immediately, right? We launched our first cohort this year. We had over 500 people participate with a 99% satisfaction rate. Wow. 100% of our mentees said that they felt the program helped them make progress towards achieving professional goals. And another, I think it was maybe 92 or 93% of our mentors even said they were able to share or to receive valuable career advice themselves. And so we knew the program, something like this, would be a success in helping our team members broaden their professional networks. But I think we've actually been even more blown away by the levels of impact. And so there's that side of it, right? But Anne Maria also spoke to, what do the policies look like? What are our, outside of our practices, what are our policies? And so another key strategy that we've employed for kind of mitigating this mid-career gap is ensuring that they're transparent and objective. And I'll repeat that, transparent and objective career progression tools that are available to all employees. And so mentorship and sponsorship can get us but so far. But there's a fundamental, I think, understanding that has been fueled by the evolution of our performance review process, that mentorship and sponsorship don't deliver kind of equitable growth and promotion criteria. And so we focused on that as well. And that has involved, I think, reaching beyond this perfunctory performance review checklist. And we've created a more robust ecosystem and a comprehensive competency framework. So now we are providing every employee within our organization a clear roadmap for personal and professional growth. And this growth, specifically, it's level specific, it's nuance based on our subject matter expertise for each department. And it's also values based on who we are as an organization and how we are committed to showing up both as an organization committed to DEI and what we call an agency of belonging. So this has really, I think, helped to fuel a sense of purpose and direction that's also aligned with the more equitable foundation and objective markers for skills-based success within the organization.
That's so interesting. I'm going to repeat back, I think, some of the interventions that we've heard, because together I feel like we have the whole pizza. But I think we've heard about, skills-based development and making that flexible so that, employees can do it on their own time and make sure that they're empowered. We've heard about flexible parental leave available, in most cases to both men and women or other caregivers. That helps you, I think as Catherine was saying, if you leave to have a family, return and smooth that process. We've heard about, of course, mentorship and the importance, I think I would call them, of sponsors. So people, senior leaders who invest in your growth and really, really help you see and then get to that next step. And then LaTreviette, I do want to pause briefly. That last point that you made, I used to be a management consultant, and that is the obvious. Of course, you're going to, implement transparent and objective criteria for being promoted. Of course, that's business management 101. And I won't name names, but I was on a group of very experienced, very senior HR leaders across, companies just yesterday. And I said, how many of you have, when you think about promoting someone to basically the executive level, how many of you have a written down rubric for what would qualify a person to advance to that next role? And nobody raised their hand. And it was, we were thinking about these advanced parental leave policies and these, different cultural transformation opportunities. And it's get down to basics. What does it take? How do you know if you're, perpetuating bias if you don't even know how decisions are made? So I think really interesting feedback from the panel, and thank you for those tactical suggestions. I do want to, maybe last question before Q&A. This is not on the pre-call, so hopefully not too much of a curveball, but why is it important? Why is it important to have diversity in leadership roles at your organization? And Anna Marie, I'm going to kind of pick up on something that you said, which was so simple but profound. You know, you said something like 20% industry-wide in the automotive industry of leaders are women. But how many women drive cars was kind of the point that you made. And it's probably more than 50%. So maybe talk to me about why it's important in your industry to have diversity in leadership. And that's for anyone on the panel.
I'll jump in just to start. I mean, diversity in itself is so important. And, you know, I want to say it's unfortunate that it's a topic, but it's great that at least it's a topic. The more diverse your workforce, yes, the more productive your workforce. That's been proven time and time again. But the more diverse your workforce, the more accepting and tolerant and open and receptive, the better the environment is, a place to work. The feeling that people can come into work and be themselves and not have to worry about any sort of reprisal or retribution, or not being able to share how they really feel or who they are. The list can go, we can go for hours to talk about why diversity is so important. And then within the industry, ultimately, in my opinion, organizations should mimic the industry they represent, right? So in the case of automakers, if 50% or more, I don't have the actual stat in front of me, are women drivers, then why are 50% or more not actually employed within the auto industry, right? So we've got some work to do, but the good thing is that the work is being done. It is recognized. And as I mentioned earlier, it's all about progressive improvement. It's about taking the steps, being transparent, being objective, and getting the buy-in from the senior leaders. Because if you don't have that buy-in, your efforts are in vain. And the data, as already mentioned, so important. The accountability towards the data. What are your goals? Are you reviewing monthly, quarterly, annually? Are you sharing your successes, your milestones along the way? Do people have an opportunity to provide the input, be part of the solution, and just attack it in a collaborative way? So a lot of good comes out of focusing on diversity.
Thank you. Very, very well said. Any other, maybe Catherine, why is it important in finance?
Well,
or
I
asset
was
management?
just to echo the point I sort of touched on briefly earlier, in almost the enemy of good investment decision making is groupthink. If people think alike, if they don't have diverse perspectives to look at a problem in multiple ways, there's a very significant chance you could be making a bad call because you've missed something that is just not within your field of vision or within your field of experience. So, you know, I completely agree wholeheartedly with all of the observations made by Anna Marie around, you know, the overall environment, the kind of nature of the business, frankly, the sustainability of the business, with people that want to stay and commit and be loyal because it's a decent values-based place to work. But, you know, it's in the specific sort of aspects of the front end of the investment engine, that is having different voices, well, having different perspectives and the voices heard. That's the other sort of aspect here is extending that point around culture. We're blown away by everything that Amy Evanson's written around psychological safety and the danger of not being able to speak up if you observe something. So we have really, even in my area, really actively talked about psychological safety. What does it mean? Can the most junior person in the team say, I know we really like this business and we're thinking of lending such and such, but I've got this concern or I've got this experience. Can they say that and be heard actively? It is the best way in which we serve our clients' needs in truly understanding with all lenses what it is that we're getting into in our investments. We only do that if you have different perspectives across so many different intersections, of course, as well. So I think the point you also made there, Anna Marie, around data is absolutely crucial. So this has been a big focus for us as well. The data's come up so much, but capture, reporting, visibility, accountability. That's the other thing. It doesn't just sit with the executive committee we've embedded explicit objectives for all of our senior leadership to support the delivery of the overall targets that we've set ourselves, indeed to overreach them. So that is involved, through performance review, reward is linked to delivery to these features, not just headline numbers, but inclusive factors as well that come through other measures of measurement. So through surveys and other sort of touch points we have through the year to test that second point. The data is one thing, the reality of how people's lived experience is another. So it's absolutely critical to my mind in investment management.
I think, Catherine, very sensible. And it seems when you say it self-evident, but I think I want to highlight on the data and reporting piece. Like in all of our experience, that is a critical piece. There's actually 20 different reasons that you could lose talent, fail to advance them, fail to promote them. But the single most important thing we see companies do is implement metrics, start tracking them, hold someone accountable for changing them. So I love that you brought that up. I'm going to flip maybe to close this out. As Anna Maria and Catherine have both said, there's a lot to lose by not having diversity at the senior levels. This is a leading question, but LaTreviette, just because I have, inside information, there's also a lot to gain. So maybe talk to me about, your perspective there.
Absolutely. Listen, I referenced it earlier. We have all of the data that points to the business benefits of diversity within an organization, whether it's from a profitability perspective, whether it's from retention, whether it's sentiment, whether it's innovation. We actually have data and metrics to put against each of these, right? Each of the core areas of our business. And having increased diversity at the senior levels has definitively been proven to positively impact, right? And so, we hear that the saying representation matters because representation actually matters. We're all running businesses. We're all focused, yes, on our people and also performance. And when you put the two together in the right way, it is incredible what you see on the other side of that. You actually do see the results and the benefits of it. And I think that as per our conversation today, right, unless we are proactively being very intentional about addressing some of what we know these issues are that are perpetuating these cycles of underrepresentation, right, of diverse professionals leaving the field or the industries before they're reaching senior levels. There's burnout, there's frustration with what they're seeing by way of lack of inclusivity, their lack of opportunities and clear pathways to that opportunity. And so these are all things that we know, right? And so my perspective is always, so now that we have the information, what are we going to do about it? It's not good. It's not bad. It's indifferent. Give me any information that there is so that we can then determine what we need to do to close the gaps that exist.
Maybe building on that. So we have a few audience questions, some of which actually have been covered, but talk to me about employee feedback. How important is employee feedback in these processes? How do you collect it? How do you, create a safe space for people to share? How do you measure it?
Employee feedback for us is critical. And one of the ways that we collect it is through our benchmarking work with Diversio. We just completed our second year, and we'll get our 2024 results in about a month. And I'm really excited for that because we know what our kind of data was for 2023. With its next layer will help us understand what may have been a moment in time versus what may be trending that we now need to put even more of a focus around, right? And so it's very difficult. And I think, all of us can sit in ivory towers and conference rooms and decide that we know what is best for people when even with the best intentions, we simply don't, right? And it's why listening is such a critical part of leadership. And so, whether it's our town halls, whether it is our kind of connected digital hub that's otherwise known as our version of an intranet, where employees are encouraged to give feedback, whether it's to me, whether it's to our CEO, whether it's in formal surveys and pulse checks that we do throughout the year. We want to know because, again, It's not necessarily that something is good. It's not that it's bad. It's we need to understand the state of our union so that we can then understand how we continue advancing on the path that we've set as an agency of belonging.
Love that. Catherine and Maria, anything that you would add on employee feedback, how you collect it, how what you think about it?
Yeah, I think a couple of things I'll add. 2 points. One, we also partnered with Diversio and we launched the DEI survey last year. It was so invaluable because I think as leaders, with good intent, you sometimes kind of look around and you say to yourself, I know what the footprint of my organization is. I see it, I feel it, I understand it. I think we're doing this really well and we have opportunity over there. We did the survey, and the nice thing about the survey is that it allowed employees to tell us very personal and important things about themselves in a way that was completely safe. We got a very high participation rate, and we got the findings, and there were some ahas. There were some things that came out of the survey where we went, wow, we didn't know what we didn't know. Not because we were malintended, we just didn't know. And so the survey is so important. That data is so important. The second piece is doing something with that information. So we shared the survey results completely transparent with all staff. This is what we got. This is what you told us. This is our footprint. We had conversation around it, and now we've set out a strategy and roadmap that directly ties into the results of the survey. So it's gone over very well. Some good aha moments, and definitely getting us to being more effective than we were. And it really eliminates the what we thought versus what actually is. So important.
Thank you. Catherine, anything that you would add?
The only other point was around the getting into the sort of professional rhythm of feedback, as in it's not a one-off. We've, as an organisation, when we demoted from Pru in 2019, we had an opportunity actually to reset how we wanted to organise ourselves, and that included, really for the first time, a regular program of feedback, so we can observe trends as well. So that took some adjustment actually for the organisation to get used to that sort of new rhythm, that this would be happening very regularly, and it would happen again, and that took a little bit of adjusting to, I think, the whole organisation. The only other tiny point I was going to make was the thing that I read most. The headline data is incredibly important, and we similarly report it straight back to our clients. To our employees, so we can be transparent, because there's a level of kind of honesty and an attempt at transparency. We're not hiding anything. This is what the data, raw information. I look at the specific comments made, the individual separate comments made line by line in my team, because if there were none, I'd have a concern that people didn't feel that either they were engaged enough or that they felt safe enough to say something. But there's always, and that's just for me, just to really get the raw perspective from individuals, and I find that very powerful as well. So there's headline data and metrics, and then there's real tangible, personally conveyed observations that we need to read. We need to listen, as you said before.
That's really, I think, good area to end on. I'm going to plug a little bit of the product. I hope I'm not spoiling anything to come, but one thing that we use in our platform is NLP to analyze free text data and how that algorithm works. And we had to be very careful in training the algorithm so we weren't perpetuating bias and have a diverse group of analysts tagging the data, et cetera. But what we found is HR leaders that wanted to read all of that feedback, that can be really emotional and challenging to read some of those stories. And how do you kind of take your own emotional reaction and bias out of the, how could you truly? And so one thing we're trying to roll out in the product is a tool to help parse through, interpret, synthesize the data in a way that gives you the results. And then you can read through it on your own time, but kind of have the data, the statistics as the output. So I want to say I'm seeing some other panelists for the next session start to join. Huge thank you. Really, I think, interesting, engaging panel to kick us off. Such an important topic. I'm sure we'll weave through the themes throughout the rest of the day. So really big thanks to all of you for joining. We really appreciate it.